The tragedy of Flight 191 will forever be etched in the minds of not only the victims and their families, but the rescue workers representing the airport and the many responding mutual aid agencies. It is our sincere hope that by sharing our experiences, both good and bad, and the techniques and procedures applied to the crash of Flight 191, that we may provide useful information to all members of the professional police, fire, and emergency medical services community. It is to this end and to the memory of those who lost their lives in the crash of Flight 191 that we dedicate this program.
The spirit of Texas on air.
This is the News 8 Update with Tracy Rowlett, John Criswell, Troy Dungan with weather, and Dale Hansen on sports.
At approximately 6:05 p.m. Central Daylight Time, a Delta Airlines Lockheed L-1011 wide-body passenger jet crashed while on final approach to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport.
Tonight, a sudden but severe thunderstorm may have played a part in the crash of Delta Flight 191. The jumbo jet was carrying 160 people. Tonight, officials fear as many as 130 of those may have died.
But there were survivors, some who walked away from the crash site with only minor injuries. Channel 8's Dave Cassidy is live on the scene. And Dave, what is the situation at this point?
Tracy, we're waiting for the federal investigators to arrive here shortly after midnight. Until then, things will stay pretty much intact. It's been almost exactly 4 hours since a Delta pilot was trying desperately to safely land that L-1011, which you can't really see behind us right now. There isn't enough light. But the tail section is there. The survivors and those who did not survive have been removed. And we have two reports on how this happened. First from Channel 8's Nan Goplerud.
Rescue workers poured into the scene minutes after Delta Flight 191 went down. They rushed to remove a handful of stunned and terrified passengers from the remains of the charred jumbo jet.
We had a water tower. I think it was a wind shear. Did you see any lightning? No.
But in the words of one official at the scene, there were far more who died tonight on Flight 191 than survived. In all, about 20 people were taken to area hospitals for treatment. Rescue workers carefully moved the rest, putting their bodies on stretchers and taking them a distance from the main crash site. According to officials, the Delta jet was en route nonstop from Fort Lauderdale to DFW Airport and was to go on to Los Angeles. Delta officials say 166 passengers and 11 crew members were on board. A heavy thunderstorm and frequent lightning were underway as the L-1011 headed for its final approach from the north end of the airport when it exploded. Officials say it may have been hit by lightning, or perhaps it hit a wind shear which smashed it to the ground. The jet apparently hit the ground on the north side of Highway 114, striking several cars as it passed over the highway. Then it clipped a huge water tower and came to rest several hundred yards beyond. It left behind a swath of debris and death. Hundreds of rescue workers, police, ambulance crews, and fire departments rushed to the crash scene. Care Flight helicopters also carried the injured to 5 area hospitals. For some time, firefighters poured water on debris that burned and smoldered. Several hours after the crash, solemn Delta officials called a news conference to answer questions about the tragedy.
It got out of Fort Lauderdale on time at 4:10 this afternoon. It was due in here at 5:49. And the incident happened at 6:05 p.m. this evening.
Was there any contact with the tower or any FAA officials in the flight control center over near the airport about any problems they were having approaching in the weather, in the thunderhead?
There may have been, but I'm not aware of any right now.
Delta officials say a temporary morgue has been set up in a Delta hangar at the airport. They will begin notifying the families of the survivors as soon as possible, but it's unclear so far how many have survived. The identity of the passengers and crew have not yet been released. No one knows for sure why Delta Flight 191 went down. It will take federal investigators days to search the scene to try to determine that. The crash of the L-1011 is the first major accident at DFW Airport in its 11-year history. Nan Goplerud, Channel 8 News, DFW Airport.
The crash came in a storm that pounded the north end of DFW Airport during the last of rush hour at 6:03 p.m. It was at a time and a place where many people, particularly motorists, could have and did witness the fire and devastation. Anthony Rogers was driving on Highway 114 when his car was struck by the L-1011.
The rain was so hard you couldn't see 30 foot in front of you, and all of a sudden it seemed like just caught a tire, a glimpse of a tire, and a big jolt just bounced my car. I turned back and I saw just it looked like a big explosion right over there, the ball of fire and the mushroom cloud.
Another motorist was not so lucky. The person in front of Anthony's car was dragged from his driver's seat by the jet and killed. Another perspective from the 10th floor of the Marriott Hotel. Robert Braden of San Angelo saw it all.
We was watching the weather and we was watching airplanes and that, but this one started coming in real low. We thought it was going to hit the building on the other side of the bridge. As it got to the freeway over there, it hit a car and just wiped it out. When it did, it just threw the wing into a 45, and then when the wing hit, it just burst into a flame of fire. And we watched it come across the bridge over to here, and we seen it hit here, and when it hit here, it just, it just exploded, and then it went up about 150 feet further, and we couldn't see no more what happened.
Certainly the storm played a major part in the crash. Some say lightning, others speculate winds. Braden wasn't sure.
It was pouring down real hard. We've seen lightning strike, but we don't know if it hit the plane or not.
Throughout its 11 years, DFW has been charmed. No major accident until now. The fire, the devastation, the reality of it all still hadn't sunk in even at the scene.
I don't know. It's just still trying to gather everything right now. I can't believe it happened.
Of course, many people have seen the wreckage from the highway since the crash. The airport appeared to be shut down immediately after the crash, but within an hour, jets were taking off to the north from the main runway. In the setting sun, passengers in those jets certainly could gaze out their windows at the sober sight.
Jimmy, you were one of the first news people on the scene of the crash. What was it like when you got there? It looked, back here at least, very chaotic.
Well, it seemed to be mostly like controlled pandemonium. There were many emergency workers on the scene, but most of them appeared to know what they were doing and appeared to be doing a job. There wasn't a lot of emotion involved in those workers. We, as I say, we were probably the first news crew, TV news crew on the scene, from what we could see, and we were there probably 45 minutes after the crash itself. And so whatever emotion would have been immediate, those workers would have overcome that emotion by then. They were working very soberly. We walked out into the wreckage, and it seemed as we walked into the wreckage that you could look a long way and see wreckage.
They've rehearsed this many times, of course, hoping that it would never happen. At least twice a year, they have an emergency drill at DFW Airport to prepare them for just such an occurrence, should it ever happen. And so the plan goes into effect the minute this sort of thing occurs.
The plan went into effect immediately, of course, and one of the airport officials out there, the assistant director, told me he thought the plan was really executed quite well. The mutual aid with all the fire departments involved. There were dozens of ambulances, it seemed. I've never seen so many ambulances on the scene, and they all seemed to be arriving at when they were needed.
All right, Jim, thank you very much. Many of the victims of tonight's air disaster were taken to Parkland Hospital in Dallas. That's where Channel 8's medical editor, Dennis Johnson, has been all evening. He is standing by now with a live report. Dennis?
As you can imagine, it has been a very busy evening here at Parkland Hospital because of the crash out of DFW Airport this evening. A total of 17 victims were brought to Parkland. They came in by 5 ambulances and 2 helicopter transports. A total of 17 again, as we said, and the doctors list them this way. 1 child, a baby, was brought in, died, was severely burned. 2 other patients are in critical condition, 4 are in serious condition, 8 are listed in good condition, and 2 were treated and released.
Years resident, somebody that's senior covered room number 1.
The first wave of the injured swept into Parkland just after 7 o'clock. They came by 5 ambulances, and there were 2 helicopter transfers. The emergency room resembled a MASH unit on full alert, as over 60 doctors and numerous nurses and other medical personnel assessed the incoming injured. When the extent of the injuries was determined, the patients were then sent to various parts of the hospital. The burn unit was an especially busy place. Others were examined for internal injuries and broken bones and abrasions. Some victims were able to walk into the emergency room, although they did look dazed.
2 of the 17 are critical, 3 are serious, 3 are in fair condition, 8 are actually in good condition. There's been 1 fatality so far, that of a 1-year-old child with a burn. We've already treated and released 2 patients. 1 patient has already been admitted to the pediatric trauma intensive care unit. We have 4 very serious burns of the 17 people here, and 2 very serious neurosurgical injuries, but both of those patients have multiple internal injuries too.
Other patients were taken to Hearst Euless Bedford Hospital and St. Paul Medical Center in Dallas. An immediate appeal went out for blood donations, and several hundred people answered the call. Parkland practices a mass casualty plan several times a year. The last time that plan was executed for real was in the 1950s because of a tornado. Parkland officials say the medical response went quite well. In fact, according to Parkland Administrator Dr. Ron Anderson, there were almost too many doctors. Also, there is a possibility that a few more patients may be coming here to Parkland this evening. They would, in all likelihood, be burn patients who were taken to surrounding hospitals, but because Parkland has the nationally famous burn unit, they would be brought here. That could happen later on this evening. And one other interesting note, Dr. Ron Anderson himself was in the air over DFW Airport this evening. He was coming in on a Frontier Airlines flight from Denver. He told us at the hospital he was on a parallel course with the Delta jet, and all of a sudden they were diverted to land at Love Field. Later, he said, talking to some of the passengers, at the time the weather was a little heavy and that there were some severe lightning bolts. Tracy?
Okay, Dennis, thank you. The Delta terminal at DFW Airport is where approximately 30 friends and relatives were waiting for Flight 191 to arrive this evening. And that's where Channel 8's Brad Watson is standing by right now. Brad?
Well, Tracy, it has been a busy evening here, obviously, at the Delta terminal. Delta officials now say that the terminal has returned to a bit of normalcy. Normally, Friday night is a busy evening for them because of the people coming and going, getting out of the city for travel plans, either business or pleasure plans. Earlier, they had somewhat of a difficult time. You know, Flight 191 was scheduled to arrive at Delta Terminal 4E Gate 10 at 5:49 tonight. Of course, it never made it, but friends and relatives of the passengers did arrive. When people did come in at the gate, they weren't given any information by the ticket personnel about the fate of the flight. Deborah Kelly of the Colony had come to pick up her brother who was coming in from Fort Lauderdale. We talked with her briefly. What? Go. Okay. Deborah, what have you been told so far?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Just that lightning hit the plane and that the plane crashed. That's all I've known.
This flight was supposed to arrive at 5:45. I think it was 5:45 or 6:45.
To the terminal. Delta's District Director of Marketing, Matt Guilfoyle, finally met with reporters. He said 20 to 30 people who knew passengers were taken to a private room at the terminal.
We have our people with them and are feeding them information as it becomes available.
Have you been able to identify any of the bodies for any of the people that are here?
Not to my knowledge, no.
When will that information be released? When will we know who's on the manifest?
I'm going to try and get that to you as fast as I can this evening.
To accommodate some of the people who knew passengers on Flight 191, phones have been put in out here at the Delta terminal. GTE, the system which services DFW Airport, was literally swamped with calls tonight, primarily from people who were in the terminal who had to catch Flight 191 or who were on other Delta flights that may have been leaving about at the same time or arriving. The phone system here was swamped. There was no way to get any phone calls out of DFW. GTE rushed out here and put in 15 additional phones, some that were put in out at the crash site and some in the lower level of the terminal here. So the various relatives and friends who are still here at the terminal could make phone calls. Also, the Delta marketing people who are handling the information here at DFW, they're getting their information, of course, from the home office in Atlanta. So at this point, the terminal is quiet once again, but Delta is going to hold a news conference, we're told, at about 11 o'clock with some updated information. Brad Watson, Channel 8 News, reporting live from the Delta terminal at DFW International Airport.
Okay, Brad, thank you. And the aircraft that crashed this afternoon at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport was a Lockheed 1011 TriStar. The plane is regarded as one of the most technologically advanced aircraft of its kind, but today's crash marks the third major TriStar accident. Byron Harris is with us tonight with this report. Byron?
Tracy, before today's crash, there were two other TriStar disasters. The first was an Eastern flight which went down in the Everglades in 1972. The second was a Saudi Arabian L-1011 which crashed in an emergency landing in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia in August of 1980. The L-1011 TriStar was made by Lockheed here at its factory in Palmdale, California. The aircraft first flew in 1970. About 245 of the planes were made before Lockheed ceased production in 1983. Lockheed quit making the aircraft because it was not commercially successful. The domestic model of the TriStar is 177 feet long with a wingspan of 155 feet. It has a loaded takeoff weight of 215 tons. Rolls-Royce made the engines for the aircraft in that company's first major engine contract. Delta owns 38 TriStars, some of which were designed for overseas routes. In their domestic configuration, the Delta aircraft carry 263 passengers. Typically, the Fort Lauderdale to Dallas run is staffed by 3 in the cockpit with 9 flight attendants, most of whom have worked 5 to 10 years for the airline. Today's flight is usually the beginning of 2 round trips from Fort Lauderdale to Dallas for the flight attendants, with the trip beginning on Friday and ending on Monday. While Lockheed could not sell enough TriStars to make money on them, it is a very popular plane among those who fly it. The previous crashes were attributed to pilot error, and in the case of the Saudi Arabian crash, the fact that passengers started a fire on board the plane. Today's crash comes as a surprise to many who are familiar with the TriStar. John?
All right, Byron, thank you very much. Since it opened in 1973, DFW Airport has compiled an impressive safety record. But Channel 8's David Margulies reports airport executives knew that eventually there would be a crash and prepared for it.
It is the nation's 4th busiest airport and one of the safest. Until tonight, there had never been a fatal crash involving a passenger jet at DFW Airport. Design was one reason. The giant airport, bigger than the island of Manhattan, had plenty of runways and lots of room. But luck also played a part. Luck airport officials knew would someday run out. Preparations for an air disaster have been going on here since before the concrete was dry. DFW officials drew up an emergency plan, then modified it after visiting crash scenes at other airports. When this American Airlines jet crashed in Chicago in 1979, airport workers were dispatched to Chicago to watch how rescue efforts went there and see how things could be improved. They learned ambulances needed extra ice for burn victims. One suggestion brought from the crash was to use a police helicopter to gain a high vantage point to coordinate rescue efforts.
Instead of depending on second or third hand information from a car right at the site, trying to relay it to the CP, get a commander straight up in the air. That way you've got definite information you can depend on, and you can better deploy your resources.
The airport and local hospitals also use elaborate drills to prepare for a major emergency, with the help of volunteers playing the part of crash victims. Medical workers and police officers learned what to expect and how to deal with the massive casualties that come only from an air disaster, a natural disaster, or a war. This drill took place in May 1973. Tonight, it appears all that planning paid off.
The scene itself, by the time we arrived, seemed to be very controlled. There were numerous ambulances, attendants, numerous firefighters on the scene. They all seemed to have assigned duties, and they seemed at that point to be carrying them out.
DFW Airport was dedicated on September 22nd, 1973. Tonight's crash ends its perfect safety record, 1 month short of the airport's 12th anniversary. David Margulies, Channel 8 News.
There have been some preliminary unconfirmed reports that the Delta flight might have been hit by a sudden downdraft of air from the violent storm, which was in the area at the time. The downdrafts have been responsible for other commercial airline disasters in the past. Channel 8's Scott Pelley joins us now with details on this part of the story. Scott?
Tracy, the violent wind drafts are known as wind shear. They can knock down even the largest airplane by disturbing the airflow over the wing or by hitting the plane directly from the top in a phenomenon known as microburst. The problem was first recognized 9 years ago. One evening in 1975, a 727 passenger jet en route to New York's Kennedy Airport crashed in a heavy storm. It was later learned that the flight was hit with a sudden severe downdraft of wind known as wind shear. After that crash, the Federal Aviation Administration required wind shear indicators like this one at most U.S. airports. This indicator is at DFW International. The FAA has not yet released the wind shear data developed by the instruments at the time of this evening's crash. But Channel 8 precision radar at the time of the accident indicates a very heavy thunderstorm right over the airport. This is the kind of storm that can generate the sudden wind shear drafts. If the aircraft was hit by wind shear, it came at the moment when the plane was most vulnerable. As it was landing, its engines throttled back, its altitude very low. Again, it is not confirmed that tonight's disaster was caused by wind shear. There have been other witness reports that the plane was hit by lightning. Tonight, the National Weather Service in Fort Worth is storing away the data generated at the time of the storm for later use by investigators.
Scott, thank you.
Whatever happened, the weather, of course, was at least a possible and probable cause. We're going to be checking in with Jim Littleton in just a moment.
We were watching the radar at about the same time that this crash occurred, Jim, and there was certainly a thunderstorm moving through at that moment.
It was, and in fact, John, it was most unusual because 15 minutes before 6 o'clock, we had looked at the radar and there was nothing there. I mean, this was a rapidly built up thunderstorm. It came up very, very quickly, and as it did, we caught it with the Channel 8 precision radar. This is actually about 10 minutes after the time of the reported crash, and you can see there was a most intense thunderstorm indicated by the red area right over the east side runways, the Dallas County side runways of DFW Airport, and right at the precise location where that crash occurred. We can take this shot up just a little bit closer, and as we do, you can see this core area of red and then the little flecks of white. At the particular angle the radar was at, that would indicate a very heavy downpour of rain in that particular area. There may have been hail, and we've heard reports of lightning. We did some minor Doppler analysis, and quite frankly, it happened so quickly we didn't see a lot, but we saw no significant rotation. And I've talked to a couple of folks that were out along Highway 114 at just about the time of the crash. They tell me there was a tremendous amount of lightning, but the winds, no one seems to be able to pin that down tonight, and certainly I'm not going to try. Just wanted to show you these pictures. Here's how it looked at that time. Here is the radar sequence from the National Weather Service radar in Stephenville, and as we follow the motion, there is the storm. It just died away within about a half an hour. Another storm over Fort Worth was gone, and then there was some out west, and tonight there's nothing left. We have generally fair skies and quite a pleasant evening around North Texas.
On this site, August 2nd, 1985, Delta Flight 191 met its tragic end. Now, there's not much evidence here today to remind us of that tragedy, or of the complex series of events it set in motion. I'm Jerome Davis. In these next few moments, let's explore the series of events that comprise the response to the crash of 191, not only by the airport and its personnel, but by the agencies from the surrounding communities. Now, to fully understand this response, we must also understand the framework or the setting in which the response occurred.
Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport was opened in January of 1974, and in its 12 years of service to the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, it has grown to become the 4th busiest airport in the world. Its size, just under 30 square miles, makes Dallas-Fort Worth Airport the 2nd largest airport in the world. Operationally, approximately 1,700 flight operations, roughly divided between landings and takeoffs, occur here every 24 hours. On a daily basis, Dallas-Fort Worth Airport handles approximately 100,000 airline passengers. On a daily basis, some 23,000 men and women are employed at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. The Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport Board, which is the operating authority for this airport, employs an additional 1,100 men and women. Organizationally, the airport board has many departments, ranging from administration, administrative services, marketing, transportation, public safety, facilities maintenance, properties and facilities, and planning and engineering, as well as information services.
The fourth busiest and second largest airport in the world, operated much like a city by an independent body, the Airport Board. Among the many services provided by the board's departments are fire, emergency medical, and law enforcement. Somewhat uniquely, the Airport Board chose to combine those services and airfield operations into one department, the Department of Public Safety.
The problem that most organizations have is that you simply can't afford the level of manpower that a disaster requires. So our philosophy from day one was through cross-training to be able to get the maximum utilization of our 250 plus officers. And of course our approach to a plane crash in particular has always been that we felt the first priority and the first job to be performed was that of firefighter. Followed almost immediately by a tremendous emergency medical requirement, depending on the number of casualties. And then the third and final phase would be one involving law enforcement that would involve protecting the scene, controlling the crowd, interviewing witnesses, documenting the results of the incident itself.
The cross-training concept, with all officers being certified with expertise in law enforcement, firefighting, and emergency medical services, demands a high degree of skill, dedication, and professionalism. But a disaster such as the crash of Flight 191 can demand much more. The Federal Aviation Administration requires airports to have an emergency plan, and Dallas-Fort Worth Airport has one. But is planning for a disaster such as 191 enough?
Certainly a plan is important, but it seems to me that a plan is a little more than a guide as to how things might work best under a given set of circumstances. The problem is we can't predict with accuracy what those circumstances are going to be. Consequently, field commanders must have the authority to modify a plan as need dictates. Our personnel are comfortable with this additional responsibility, and I think that was reflected in their response to the crash of Flight 191. As a practical matter, I place about 25% of my stock in the plan itself, and the remaining 75% in the knowledge, training, and good judgment of the people who are expected to implement that plan. We've taken a number of steps at DFW over the years preparing for a Delta 191, and that includes periodic mock aircraft disaster drills, and we also initiated in the early 70s what we refer to as a crash critique team. That's a special team of command level police and fire officers who have been pre-selected and who are immediately dispatched to the scene of any major aircraft crash in the continental U.S. Their mission, once they arrive at the scene, is to mentally apply our emergency plan to the circumstances they find at the crash site, so that the end result is they either validate the plan that we have in place at that time, or they cause us to amend it in order to meet the unusual set of circumstances that they find.
Shortly after DFW Airport opened, it also initiated a series of mock aircraft crashes called lifesaver drills. The purpose of these drills was to exercise the emergency plan, not only for the airport's personnel, but also for the numerous mutual aid agencies and volunteer organizations that would be involved in a major crash.
The lifesaver drills were a great asset to us in that the people were aware of what could happen and they had practiced it. Not only our people, but the mutual aid responding people knew where to go. And because of the fact that we had had the disaster drills, the lifesaver drills, had been in approximately a mile from where the actual airplane crashed.
We made it a point over the years in conducting our drills to pick different days of the week, different times of the day. We had daylight drills and then nighttime drills so that we could test our emergency lighting capability. And we also had a drill, as I recall, one afternoon in a rainstorm. And I remember one of the questions was, the weather looks kind of bad. Do we want to call this drill off? And, you know, in view of the weather. And the response from our staff was, you know, you can have plane crashes in bad weather and a heavy rainstorm, just like you can in good weather. And as it turned out, that's exactly what happened to us.
So there you have it, a very large, busy airport with its own police, fire, and medical services combined into one department for efficiency in addressing the needs of a disaster such as Flight 191. With its emergency plan, crash critique teams, and lifesaver drills, Dallas-Fort Worth Airport's readiness could rightfully be described as exceptional. On August 2nd, 1985, shortly after 6 p.m., the tragedy that DFW had longed planned for and prepared for, yet hoped would never happen, did happen. The crash of Flight 191 set into motion an almost overwhelming series of events. Overwhelming in the vastness and immediacy of the needs. Fire suppression, rescue of survivors, triaging, personnel call-up, mutual aid requests, providing access routes for incoming emergency personnel and transport of injured survivors, establishing control of the site with a command post and perimeters, providing a landing zone for emergency helicopters. All this and much more happening almost simultaneously. Now, we will review the response to 191 in two stages. First, as a rescue effort when there were still survivors on the scene. Then, as a recovery effort after the last survivors had been transported from the site. But what was it like in those first urgent minutes?
Nobody is to land at the airport. We've had a crash. Everybody go around. Station 113 Alpha. We got an alert 3 over by the east air freight area. Tower Delta 557 with you, final 17 left. Where's the crash tracks? They're coming. Report of a heavy jet just crashed off the north end of the airport. Report of a heavy jet just crashed off the north end of the airport. 31. 33 is spotted. 32 and 33. 21.
It was lying on its side, and from the cone configuration of the tail, I thought it was a DC-10, and it was so black and charred, I thought it was a UPS ship. Debris everywhere. Fire to the north, heavy black smoke. Driving, pouring rain, small fragments of hail. Unrecognizable objects. Then suddenly everything comes into focus. Then you see the bodies, a few people. And then other pictures appear. You see people walking. You report that there are survivors.
31's on. 31's on. 33's on. 33's on.
Folks in Station 3 saw the aircraft when it crashed. From the time they saw the crash, they were on the scene in less than 1 minute, and approximately 1 minute after they arrived on the scene, the fire was out.
When I first arrived on the scene, you probably couldn't see past the hood of the car. I had reports from some of the fire units that were closer, that arrived within the first, minute of the crash, that reported, what they saw, that we did have a major crash.
Well, initially, the response of the people from Station 3, they saw the airplane crash. They had no problem getting there. As the units from Station 1 and Station 2 arrived, the storm arrived.
the excessive winds and heavy rain, and winds up to excess of 80 miles an hour, and the rain to the point that they couldn't even see, and the quick temperature change fogged the windshields over in a truck. So the second and third units coming in had a difficult time getting there.
The rapid response from DPS Station 3 and tremendous firefighting capabilities of the crash trucks and their operators extinguished all but the insignificant outlying fires within approximately 2 minutes of the crash. The EMS section sprang into action.
We had a great deal of EMS response shortly after the crash had occurred, and the triage area was set up about 100 yards from where we thought would be the most, where we thought the most victims would be located.
Our initial priority assessment of the area was to get the triage area itself established. Within our system, we have several trailers that accompany us, or that we have specifically designed for this type of operation. They are equipped with any medical supplies that we might need. There are recovery backboards. Unfortunately, there are body bags and pieces bags. The initial priority was to get this area established. It's a location that any of the survivors that are recovered are brought to, and an immediate medical assessment is made whereby you initiate treatment. We had so much training and so much emphasis placed upon the triage area that was paramount. If there were to be any survivors, we were going to make sure that there was an area for her to bring them to. Parking the car, getting out of the car, fighting the rain. I do recall it being just severe, wind blowing. You couldn't hardly keep the car door closed or open. Walking through the debris, coming across two people, two females, picking one up and carrying her out and leading the other one over to where the ambulance was. Working with a patient. Suddenly there are 5 more on the ground with you. So you try and work with them, and then suddenly you've got 5 more. Remembering that your job is triaging. As soon as the ambulances came, my partner lining the ambulances up, the evacuation routes in and out, helicopter landing spots, things of this nature. Communications with the hospitals.
Upon request, Dallas Parkland Hospital and Burn Center initiated its emergency plan as practiced in lifesaver drills, preparing to receive survivors and sending medical teams via helicopter.
5 p.m. First units in were a care flight helicopter, and then all available ambulances from Dallas, from other nearby communities, Hurst, Euless, Bedford, Coppell, and other areas were pressed into service. Even private ambulances were sent to the scene of the crash, and victims began pouring into Parkland Hospital, to the burn unit, as well as other hospitals. 4 early victims went to Hurst, Euless, Bedford Hospital. 2 were listed in critical condition there, 2 in serious condition. Well, the Airfield Operations Division is responsible for maintaining the opening of the airport, keeping airplanes flying. The airport was shut down by the FAA when the plane crashed.
But the airport could not remain totally closed for long without sending a ripple effect of delays and reroutings throughout the United States.
DFW, being as large as it is lucky enough to have practically 2 airports here. So the west side of the airfield was reopened. It took 17 minutes to get that reopened. I stayed in the area of the crash. We began coordinating with the tower for the helicopters that were inbound. They seemed to start showing up almost immediately. But the first one to arrive actually got there so quickly that he could not land or approach the area right away because of the heavy rain and the wind. I got out of my vehicle finally when he arrived and directed him onto the ground and tried to give him as safe a landing as I could. Even though we had heavy rains and wind at the time, he had 2 nurses aboard, and those nurses were let out, and I put him in my car and took him over to triage.
Mutual aid was requested, and the response was almost immediate and overwhelming. Much of the mutual aid responded without being requested. As practiced in the lifesaver drills, many mutual aid agencies responded to the predetermined staging area, only to find that 191 had crashed into the staging area. Quick action on the part of the first arriving supervisors prevented much confusion by establishing an alternate area. The on-duty lieutenants quickly established a command post location with their vehicle. Shortly after, the airport's designated command post vehicle arrived. Command structures and responsibilities were automatically established, and as chief officers arrived, appropriate transitions occurred.
And when I arrived at the crash site, it was still raining, it was still rather dark, cloudy. Obviously, there had been a torrential downpour. I was not involved in the torrential downpour, however, it certainly was obvious that one had occurred there. A great deal of wind because of 55-gallon drums and aircraft freight cubicles strewn around on the AOA.
Well, I heard the call on the radio. One of the airfield operations assistant duty officers came on the radio and said that we have an alert 3 in the northeast freight zone. And my first thought on that was that we had 2 small airplanes that bumped wingtips or something, which has happened in the past. I turned around to start back this way, and I saw the large column of smoke, and I knew that it was more severe than that. By the time I turned around, the alarm was being toned out simulcast. And I responded there, and I was hearing en route them talking about the heavy thunderstorms, severe winds, and I was in the bright sunshine all the way out, and I couldn't understand where they were getting this. When I got to the airport, I found out. As soon as I went through Station 1, the rain was so severe that I couldn't even see out of the car, and I had to stop. When it cleared up a little bit, I managed to get onto the scene. By the time I got to the scene, the rain was pretty well calmed down by then. I met with Lieutenant Blackman, who had set up the command post at the scene, and he briefed me on what had transpired to this point. I then took charge and assigned him to the rescue sector of the operation to direct the operations on rescuing all the survivors. We didn't know at the time how many people were in the airplane. Knowing that the capacity was 256 people, we had to assume that there were that many folks aboard. And it was well into the operation before we found out just how many people there were aboard. But the triage area was established and set and operational within 10 minutes. And the first ambulance, I think, arrived on the scene 12 minutes later, or 12 minutes after the crash. All of these survivors were triaged and treated and transported in less than an hour from the time the airplane crashed.
Vehicular traffic near the scene presented problems which had to be addressed.
Well, of course, the State Highway 114 is 200-300 yards away from the initial impact area. Therefore, everybody on State Highway 114 was stopping to watch and see what was going on. And in addition to that, the aircraft had crashed into a car that was on State Highway 114 and killing the driver and causing a large traffic jam because of that accident, which occurred prior to the impact with the water tanks.
Shortly after the crash, it became apparent that rescue and recovery would be a prolonged event requiring much logistical support.
One of the first things that came up when we saw the situation and the time of the day, which was late in the afternoon, was to get some night lighting ready. We got the barricades ready, and we had call for those things. We had call to bring water out for the people to scene. We had call to bring some portable toilets that we use for the work around here out. And
blankets over here.
We had calls to go to the warehouse and pick up certain supplies, such as body bags and that sort of thing that they were asking for. And of course, in that evening, our water tank was involved, and one of the first things that happened was that my water department personnel were involved in trying to get the flow shut off from the second tank that was not damaged severely. And then we had to switch over to get water out of the west pump station So water supply was of immediate concern, first for continuing to fight the fire, and second, continue to support the airport.
One of the problems of any disaster is controlling access to the site.
We utilize that perimeter fence and control the gates leading in and out, and control the area by doing that. So we had an outer perimeter, if you will, the fence, the airport fence, and an inner perimeter, one that we had arranged ourselves to keep people away from the very immediate crash area, and that was done with barricades and ropes and various and sundry signs telling people to stay out of the immediate area.
When the last survivor was transported to medical facilities, the rescue phase was completed. But just how effective was the rescue operation?
As I recall, everything that really needed to be done in a timely fashion, specifically locate, stabilize, and prepare for transport those survivors of the crash, all of that happened within the first 45 minutes, which I think is remarkable.
I don't think there's anything that could have been done. I think the people that responded did more than really could be expected of them. The NTSB classified this as a non-survivable accident, and yet there's 27 folks out there that are alive to say that, yes, it is a survivable accident also. And I think that's got to be attributed to the fast response and the excellent attention that the victims got.
With the rescue effort accomplished, the scene began a gradual transition into the prolonged, difficult, and often heart-rending recovery of the victims. As the pace began to change and the adrenaline subsided, the reality of what had occurred and what was yet to be done began to be realized.
Well, after the rescue was accomplished, the overall operation pace slowed somewhat, and that we were down to the recovery stages of picking up bodies, identifying the location they were picked up, and taking them to the morgue, transport to the morgue. And so things just kind of slowed down at that time. The mutual aid folks that were there were still geared up and ready to go, and we had a little concern about slowing the operation down and being more methodical about everything we did.
After the initial rescue, it was more or less searching for survivors that we couldn't see or couldn't walk out. Number one, that was our major concern. Secondly, to preserve the area for the NTSB and make sure that we had no unauthorized personnel in there. To move wreckage, or, I know a lot of people want to help. Also to make sure that we had the bodies recovered and properly placed in the temporary morgue, and make sure we had equipment to go ahead and move them, make sure the ME was there, make sure that we had enough refreshments or things like that for the officers that had been there for a long time, just to be able to be of help any way we could at the time. The major impact of the thing, after an hour and a half, as far as hurry up, we've got to do it now, was over with. We more or less took a sigh of relief of breath after about an hour and a half and said, we got some help now. Matter of fact, we stopped help. We asked them to not come because we had such a response, which is great. But at that point, we were flooded. The area was so flooded that we had more people than we actually needed. We were walking over each other.
In some cases, as I recall, we had police units respond from as far away as Texarkana, Texas. When folks travel that distance to help, once they get there, by God, they're going to help, whether you need it or not. So in time, we began to view mutual aid not only as a solution, but also a bit of a problem. If I have to have a problem, the problem of too much help is the one I want to be faced with in every major incident, because the next time you may need them. And we could well have needed them in this case had the plane been fully loaded instead of half loaded, and had there been more survivors. So the scenario could have been such that we would have needed everybody that showed up. So we don't want them to assume next time that they're not going to need me, so I'm not going to go. We'd rather turn them back.
In my case, I made arrangements through my department to get a crane out to lift a section of the airplane to recover bodies. And we stood by and sort of worked that with the crane people.
Over the years, we've come to rely quite heavily on groups such as that, in particular the Red Cross and the Salvation Army. They also have a tried and proven disaster plan that moves into place on short order, and that was the case in the Delta 191 crash. And we're very grateful to them for their support during that time. One of the most productive lesson that we learned, or that I learned as a result of the crash, was to develop a better appreciation for the news media as a resource, a source of timely, factual information. Most public safety agencies have viewed the news media over the years as an adversary. And I suspect that I shared that view to a certain extent prior to the Delta 191 crash. But the more I watched the Channel 8 news coverage, in particular the helicopter, News 8 helicopter coverage, the more I began to view Channel 8 as a resource and as a tool that could be used to our benefit and less of an opponent. And if I had one message for people who, are preparing now for the same kind of experience, I would encourage them to view the media, in particular on-site television coverage and reporting, as a resource and one that ought to be tapped. Because I found during the course of the evening that I was getting more timely information and a better quality of information from the news media than I was able to get from our own commanders on the scene. And that's not a criticism of the people on the scene. One of the things that you have to accept is that the folks who are actually dealing with a problem on the scene are frequently too busy to take the time to tell you what they're doing. And for the most part, they would like to assume, and we do assume, that they're handling the situation and they're doing a good job of it. And this permitted me to not only keep up with what was going on at the site proper, but also in the surrounding area, the traffic congestion off the airport, ambulance, being able to keep a route open for ambulances and emergency vehicles. I was satisfied in my own mind that we did everything humanly possible for the crew and passengers of that aircraft. And it was a good feeling. As I said, we'd spent 15 years planning for a Delta 191. And I am convinced in my own mind that no other airport in the world could have responded any better than we did on the evening of August the 2nd.
The response to the crash of Flight 191 will forever stand as a tribute to the many professionals, not only from the airport and its departments, but the numerous mutual aid agencies, volunteer organizations, the news media, and individuals who gave so unselfishly in what was truly the airport's greatest hour of need. The Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport Board hopes that by sharing this information and the lessons we learned, that we can help you better prepare for such a disaster. Thank you.